Welcome back to Ethos Trek. I'm Sarah. In part 1, we focused on individual counter strategies, what you can do in conversations with people who've been pulled into collective narcissistic patterns. We talked about deep canvassing, Socratic questioning, and the proven mindful gratitude intervention. But here's the truth. Individual conversations aren't enough. Collective narcissism isn't just a matter of individual psychology. It's cultivated by media ecosystems, political incentives, and social structures that profit from grievance and division. You can have the most skillful conversation in the world, but if the person goes home and spends 4 hours consuming content designed to trigger collective narcissistic responses, your conversation evaporates. So today, we're going bigger. How do communities, institutions, and movements respond? How do we build alternatives that provide belonging without requiring enemies? And how do we protect democratic structures from collective narcissism's, quote, need for chaos? This is where we move from defense to offense, not in the sense of attacking people, but in the sense of building something better. Let's get into it. Understanding the ecosystem. Before we talk about solutions, we need to understand what we're working against. Collective narcissism doesn't arise in a vacuum. It's cultivated by an ecosystem. Media, political actors, social platforms, and economic incentives that profits from keeping people in a state of perpetual grievance and threat. The business model is simple. Outrage drives engagement. Engagement drives revenue. A 2021 study by researchers at NYU found that each word of moral emotional language in a social media post increased its spread by about 20%. Platforms are literally designed to amplify the exact content that activates collective narcissistic responses. This creates what researchers call an, quote, attention economy of grievance, unquote. Media figures, political operatives, and platform algorithms all benefit from keeping audiences in a heightened state of threat perception. The system doesn't want resolution. Resolution would mean the audience moves on. Understanding this helps explain why individual conversations feel like pushing against a tide. You're not just working against a person's beliefs. You're working against an entire ecosystem designed to reinforce those beliefs 24 hours a day. The role of institutions, democracy's immune system. Remember the, quote, need for chaos, unquote, we discussed in episode 3? Collective narcissism correlates with a desire to tear down institutions that fail to give the group what it deserves. This is why collective narcissistic movements target the same institutions over and over. Independent courts, free press, professional civil service, nonpartisan election administration. These aren't random targets. They're the checks that prevent any single leader or faction from claiming absolute power. Political scientist Stephen Levitsky, co-author of How Democracies Die, calls these institutions democracy's, quote, immune system, unquote. They're designed to catch and neutralize threats before they become fatal. But here's the problem. Immune systems can be weakened gradually. Each norm violation, each attack on institutional legitimacy, each captured agency makes the next violation easier. The research on democratic backsliding shows that modern authoritarianism doesn't usually arrive through military coups. It arrives through the slow degradation of institutions. each step small enough to explain away until you look up and the guardrails are gone. This means protecting institutions isn't just bureaucratic housekeeping. It's frontline defense against the, quote, need for chaos, unquote, that collective narcissism generates. Building alternative communities. Here's something the research makes clear. You can't just remove collective narcissism. You have to replace it with something. Collective narcissism serves real psychological needs: belonging, significance, identity, purpose. If you somehow manage to strip away someone's collective narcissistic beliefs without offering an alternative, you'd leave a void that something else would fill. Often, something worse. This is why the most successful counter-radicalization programs focus on building alternative communities rather than just attacking problematic beliefs. Life After Hate, founded by former white supremacists, emphasizes that people leave extremist movements when they find belonging elsewhere, not when they lose arguments. The research on in-group satisfaction, healthy group pride, shows that it's entirely possible to have strong group identity without the defensive aggression and conspiracy thinking of collective narcissism. Healthy patriotism exists. It just looks different. It can acknowledge flaws, accept criticism, and celebrate the group without needing enemies. The strategic implication is clear. We need to invest in communities that offer meaning without requiring grievance. Religious communities, civic organizations, volunteer networks, mutual aid groups, spaces where people find purpose and belonging through contribution rather than through opposition. Media literacy and information resilience. Remember the 2015 PNAS study on Nazi-era education? The indoctrination was most effective where it aligned with pre-existing prejudices. This tells us something important. People who have developed critical thinking skills and media literacy are harder to radicalize in the first place. Research on quote-unquote prebunking, exposing people to weakened forms of misinformation techniques before they encounter the real thing, shows significant protective effects. It's essentially a vaccine. By understanding how manipulation works, people become more resistant to it. A 2022 study published in Science Advances found that prebunking videos about manipulation techniques reduced susceptibility to misinformation by up to 25%. The effect lasted for months. Unlike fact-checking after the fact, which often backfires, prebunking works with human psychology rather than against it. This suggests a systemic intervention, investing in media literacy education, particularly for young people before they're targeted by radicalization pipelines. Finland has been doing this since the 2010s, and studies show that Finnish citizens are among the most resistant to misinformation in Europe. Coalition building around concrete problems. Collective narcissism thrives on abstract enemies. The elites, the deep state, the radical left. It struggles with concrete problems that require practical solutions. Why? Because collective narcissism needs the grievance to be permanent. If the problem gets solved, the identity built around that grievance dissolves. So collective narcissistic movements always frame problems as existential and unsolvable, requiring eternal vigilance against eternal enemies. The counter strategy? Build coalitions around specific solvable problems. Healthcare costs, childcare access, infrastructure, clean water. These are issues where people across political lines share genuine interests and where progress is measurable. Research on contact theory, the idea that positive contact between groups reduces prejudice, shows that working together on shared goals is one of the most effective ways to reduce intergroup hostility. When people are focused on a concrete task, the abstract enemy categories matter less. This doesn't mean ignoring political differences. It means creating contexts where those differences aren't the whole story, where people can experience each other as neighbors, collaborators, or fellow problem solvers, rather than as enemy categories. Economic security and collective narcissism. There's a reason collective narcissism surges during economic uncertainty. When people feel their status is threatened, when the future feels precarious, the defensive aggression of collective narcissism becomes appealing. It offers explanation and enemy in one package. Research on what's called status threat shows that perceived loss of relative standing is a stronger predictor of support for authoritarian movements than absolute economic conditions. It's not just poverty that drives radicalization. It's the feeling that your group is losing ground while others gain. This has policy implications. Programs that provide genuine economic security, stable employment, affordable health care, accessible education, retirement security, reduce the psychological conditions in which collective narcissism flourishes. People with secure futures are less susceptible to movements promising to restore lost greatness. This isn't just progressive policy advocacy. It's a strategic observation. Countries with stronger social safety nets tend to have weaker far-right movements. Economic security doesn't eliminate collective narcissism, but it reduces the pool of people vulnerable to its appeal. Ready for some critical thinking? Let's address some of the harder questions. Question 1. Isn't this just partisan politics? Fair question. Throughout this series, we've discussed collective narcissism primarily in connection with right-wing movements. Is this just democratic talking points dressed up in psychology? Here's my honest answer. The research I've cited, peer-reviewed, published in major journals, documents collective narcissism across the political spectrum. Golitz de Zavala's work explicitly shows it exists on the left as well as the right. But the research also shows an asymmetry in current American politics. Studies measuring collective narcissism in political supporters consistently find higher levels among Trump supporters than among supporters of other candidates. The 2018 Federico and Golitz de Zavala study, the 2022 study on bending democracy, the 2025 BMC study, they all point in the same direction. I'm not going to pretend otherwise to appear balanced. That's not what Ethos Trek does. We follow the evidence, and the evidence shows that while collective narcissism can exist anywhere on the political spectrum, it's currently concentrated and mobilized in specific political formations. That said, the systemic interventions we've discussed, media literacy, alternative communities, institutional protection, economic security, would benefit everyone, regardless of political affiliation. They're not partisan policies. They're democracy-strengthening policies. Question 2. Can institutions really be protected? This is a darker question. If one party is systematically working to capture and dismantle democratic institutions while the other tries to preserve them, can the preservers actually win? The historical record is mixed. Democracies have been destroyed. We studied one in episode 2, but democracies have also survived authoritarian challenges. South Korea, Taiwan, and Poland all experienced authoritarian backsliding that was eventually reversed. What the successful cases have in common: sustained civic engagement, coalition building across previous divisions, and strategic focus on institutional leverage points. It's not magic. It's organized effort over time. The research also shows that democratic backsliding can be stopped at various stages. Early intervention is easier than late intervention, which is why recognizing the patterns matters. Question 3. What about the people we can't reach? In Part 1, we acknowledged that identity-fused individuals, Tier 3, rarely change through conversation. The same applies at the systemic level. There are media figures, political operatives, and movement leaders who are completely committed to collective narcissistic mobilization. They're not confused. They're not reachable. They're getting exactly what they want. The strategic response isn't to convert them. It's to reduce their audience. Every person who develops media literacy, finds alternative community, or gains economic security is a person less vulnerable to their appeals. You don't have to change the most committed to shift the landscape. Elections are often decided by margins. Cultural tipping points happen when enough people shift. Focus on the reachable and build a world where fewer people need what collective narcissism offers. Question 4. How do I avoid becoming what I'm fighting? This is the question that keeps thoughtful people up at night. Collective narcissism can emerge in any group, including groups that see themselves as fighting collective narcissism. If your resistance to authoritarianism starts requiring its own enemies, its own purity tests, its own infallible leaders, you've become what you opposed. The research on healthy group identity, in-group satisfaction, provides guidance. Can you acknowledge flaws in your own side? Can you accept criticism without experiencing it as attack? Is there any evidence that could change your mind? Are you fighting for something or just fighting against someone? Collective narcissism is fundamentally defensive. It requires constant threat to maintain. Healthy civic engagement is fundamentally constructive. It's building towards something, not just protecting against something. Keep checking yourself. Ask the hard questions. And if you notice yourself needing the fight more than wanting the goal, pause. Here are your concrete action items from today's episode. Systemic interventions you can participate in. 1. Support institutional buffers. Identify the institutional guardrails in your community and support them. Local journalism, nonpartisan election administration, independent judiciary, professional civil service. These aren't abstract concepts. They're specific organizations and roles that need support, funding, and volunteer engagement. Practical steps? Subscribe to local news. Support press freedom organizations. Volunteer as a poll worker. Show up at school board meetings. When institutions are attacked, make your support visible. 2. Build and strengthen alternative communities. Invest in communities that provide belonging without requiring enemies. Religious communities doing interfaith work. Civic organizations focused on local problem solving. Mutual aid networks. Volunteer organizations. Men's groups that offer healthy masculinity. Youth programs that build identity around contribution. If these communities don't exist in your area, consider starting them. The research is clear. People leave extremism when they find belonging elsewhere. You can be that elsewhere. 3. Advocate for media literacy education. Push for media literacy in schools and community programs. The prebunking research shows this works. But only if people actually receive the education before they're targeted. Practical steps? Talk to your school board about media literacy curricula. Support organizations developing prebunking content. Share prebunking resources with young people in your life before they need them. 4. Coalition build around concrete problems. Find issues in your community where people across political lines share genuine interests. Then organize around solving them, not around identity. The more contexts where people work together across partisan lines, the harder it is to maintain the enemy categories that collective narcissism requires. Every successful collaboration is a data point against division. 5. Support economic security policies. Advocate for policies that reduce the status anxiety that fuels collective narcissism. Healthcare access, affordable childcare, educational opportunity, retirement security, housing stability. These aren't just good policies on their own terms. They're strategic investments in a society less vulnerable to authoritarian appeals. 6. Model healthy group identity. In your own civic engagement, model what healthy patriotism and group identity look like. Acknowledge America's flaws while working to address them. Accept criticism without defensiveness. Celebrate progress without needing enemies. People learn by example. If you can show that strong group identity doesn't require the defensive aggression of collective narcissism, you expand what others see as possible. 7. Sustain yourself for the long haul. This isn't a sprint. The patterns we've discussed took decades to develop and won't be undone quickly. Burnout helps no one. Build sustainability into your engagement. Find community for support. Celebrate small wins. Take breaks when needed. The goal is to be effective over time, not to burn bright and flame out. Over 4 episodes, we've covered a lot of ground. We started with the psychology, what collective narcissism actually is, and how it differs from healthy group pride. We looked at history, how these patterns were deliberately weaponized in Nazi Germany with effects that lasted 80 years. We examined the American present, documented research showing how collective narcissism manifests in current politics. And we've ended with strategies, both individual and systemic, for countering these patterns. If there's one thing I want you to take away, it's this. Knowledge is power, but only if you use it. You now understand patterns that many people experience but can't name. You now know why direct confrontation backfires and what works instead. You can distinguish between people who might be reached and those who probably can't. You understand the ecosystem that cultivates collective narcissism and the systemic interventions that can counter it. That knowledge only matters if you do something with it. The action items in this series aren't suggestions. They're the concrete steps that research suggests actually make a difference. Not all of them will be right for your situation, but some of them will be. Find the ones that fit and do them. Collective narcissism is real. It's dangerous, and it's not going away on its own. But it's also not invincible. The same research that documents its effects also documents what counters it. We're not helpless. We just have to be strategic. I'm Sarah. This is Ethos Trek. Thanks for joining me on this series. Stay informed, stay strategic, and keep building the alternative.